Every single stereotype of an American involves a hat. Cowboy hat, baseball cap, doesn't matter. Hats are basically the national costume according to the rest of the world. So why does someone visiting an actual American city, standing in blistering heat, look around and see almost nobody wearing one today? We're figuring out what happened to the American hat. This usually comes from a visitor genuinely confused by the gap between the stereotype and reality, standing in a major American city, sweating in serious heat, expecting to see cowboy hats or baseball caps everywhere based on decades of movies and cartoons, and instead seeing almost nothing, bare heads, everywhere in brutal sun. And the first most obvious answer is one word: geography. The stereotype isn't wrong. Exactly. It's just wildly misapplied to the wrong part of the country. Because American hides an enormous amount of regional variation that most outsiders genuinely don't realize exists. Cowboy hats specifically belong to a fairly specific cultural and geographic zone, the American West and South, places tied to ranching, rodeo, and country music culture. Wearing one in a major East Coast city is roughly the equivalent of wandering around in a full historical costume. People will assume you're either a tourist heading to a themed event, or only half-jokingly cosplaying as a cowboy for the aesthetic. Even inside Texas, the supposed heartland of cowboy hats, actual daily wear is much rarer than the stereotype suggests. Someone from Austin pointed out they can go a full year without spotting one outside of an actual rodeo or a specifically Western-themed bar. The people who do wear them regularly, ironically, are often not full-time cowboys at all. Texas has an estimated 5,000 actual working cowboys in a state of over 30 million people. The hat became a much broader cultural symbol long after the job itself became genuinely rare. But baseball caps are a completely different story, and this is where the stereotype gets a lot closer to reality, just with an asterisk. Baseball caps genuinely are common in America, just not necessarily in the specific setting a visitor happened to be observing. They show up constantly at parks, beaches, sporting events, casual weekend outings. What they don't show up at is a corporate office on a weekday afternoon, which happens to be exactly when and where a lot of visitors do their people watching. A baseball cap reads as distinctly casual attire in a lot of professional settings. It's considered a notch below acceptable, right alongside flip-flops or a wrinkled t-shirt. So someone standing in a downtown business district at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday is essentially sampling the least hat-friendly slice of American life available. Head to a baseball game that same evening, and the exact same city looks completely different, caps absolutely everywhere. There's also a historical piece of this that genuinely surprised a lot of people in the conversation, because the no-hats thing is actually a pretty recent development. Believe it or not, the stereotype used to be almost the opposite of reality. Most American adults wore a hat pretty much every single day. Well into the mid-1900s, it was considered a basic, unremarkable part of getting dressed, the same way pants or shoes are today. One person put it in genuinely striking terms: if you could time travel someone from 150 years ago into a modern American city, the near total disappearance of hats would honestly be one of the more shocking changes they'd notice, right up there with how much skin modern clothing shows. Nobody has one single clean explanation for exactly why hats fell out of daily fashion so completely. Theories range from changing car designs making full-brim hats impractical, to shifting workplace dress codes to simple fashion cycles that just moved on and never really moved back. But the timeline is pretty consistently traced to somewhere around the middle of the 20th century, and it never really recovered as an everyday default. Now here's a detail that flips the "why don't Americans wear hats" question into something almost backwards, because plenty of Americans actually think everyone else should be wearing them a lot more. People who spend a lot of time outdoors, farmers, construction workers, anyone doing manual labor, treat hats as close to mandatory, not optional. And there's a genuinely serious health argument underneath the casual fashion conversation. Multiple people described real, documented skin cancer scares directly tied to years of sun exposure on an unprotected scalp, especially among bald or balding men. One person mentioned having 3 separate precancerous growths removed from his head within 18 months, specifically because he hadn't been wearing a hat outdoors. That's not really a fashion choice anymore at that point. It's just basic sun protection that a surprising number of people simply never think about until it's a medical problem. Which adds a genuinely interesting wrinkle to the original visitor's confusion, because a hat genuinely is the smarter, more protective choice in serious heat. And yet, the culture still mostly doesn't reach for one unless there's already a health scare attached to the decision. There's also a much simpler, much less dramatic explanation that keeps coming up, and it's honestly a little anticlimactic, but it's probably the biggest single factor. Most Americans, especially in cities, spend most of their outdoor time simply moving between an air-conditioned building and an air-conditioned car. The actual window of unprotected sun exposure on an average commuting day is often just a few minutes at a time, walking to a parking spot waiting for a train. That's a genuinely different relationship with the outdoors than someone from a country with a walkable city center or with a notably higher UV index. Might be used to, that last part matters more than people initially assume. Some visitors specifically come from countries with meaningfully higher peak UV exposure than most of the mainland United States, partly due to atmospheric differences at certain latitudes. Someone used to that intensity of sun genuinely needs a hat far more consistently than someone whose daily outdoor exposure adds up to roughly the walk from a front door to a car. So when you put the entire picture together, the American hat stereotype turns out to be less of a myth and more of a snapshot frozen from a completely different era, applied to the wrong region at the wrong time of day. Cowboy hats belong to a specific region most visitors never actually spend much time in. Baseball caps genuinely are everywhere, just at the beach, the ballpark, the weekend cookout, not the downtown office district where most tourists happen to be looking. And the broader decline of daily hat wearing overall traces back to a genuine, well-documented fashion and lifestyle shift that happened decades ago and simply never reversed. Mostly because modern American life spends a lot less unprotected time directly under the sun than it used to. Somewhere in there is a genuinely useful life lesson too, buried under all the fashion history. A good handful of Americans wish they'd worn a hat a lot more than they actually did. Usually right around the exact moment a dermatologist tells them why. If a simple hat can unravel an entire regional identity crisis, wait until you hear the etiquette minefield waiting for anyone attending their first real American wedding. The dress code alone is going to surprise you, and it's coming up next. Tell me in the comments, hat person or no hat person, and why.